I didn't return the necklace for a reward. I returned it because that's the rule. Every lost thing that passes through Corvain International gets carried back to its owner, no matter how rich they are, no matter how many armed men stand behind them. I didn't know the owner ran half the shipping lanes on the coast with a pistol under his coat. I didn't know that the instant he saw my face, the color would drain out of him like water through a cracked glass, that within the hour he'd ground a private jet, call off a wedding, and burn a truce 20 years in the making. And I had no idea the little girl sealed inside that locket, the child a hunted man had been searching for since he was a boy, was me. People lose the strangest things at an airport. In 6 years working the overnight desk at Corvain International's Lost and Found, I'd logged a prosthetic leg, a wedding cake packed into a hat box, a sealed urn claimed the next morning, thank God, and once a live parrot that had been taught to say a dead woman's name. I catalogued all of it under the same humming fluorescent tubes, in the same windowless room in the belly of Terminal C, long after the last red-eyes emptied the concourse and the cleaning crews dragged their machines down the marble like slow gray tides. I liked it down there. That was the part nobody understood. The quiet suited me. When you can't remember the first 7 years of your own life, silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling like the only place that won't ask you a question you can't answer, because I couldn't answer them, I mean. My earliest memory is a hospital ceiling and a stranger holding my hand. Before that, nothing. A locked door with no room behind it. The doctors had a long word for it and a shorter word, and in the end both meant the same thing. Whatever happened to me before I was 7 had been shut away so completely that even I wasn't allowed inside. All I kept from that vanished childhood were 2 things. A thin white scar, just inside my hairline, above my left ear, that I found with my fingers whenever I was nervous. And a dream that came 2 or 3 nights a month, smoke pressing gray against a low ceiling, a wooden slat an inch from my nose, and the sound of my own breathing held so tight it hurt. I always woke from it, certain I'd been hiding. I never knew from what. Nella named me. She was the one holding my hand under that hospital ceiling, a foster mother who took in the girl nobody could identify, no missing child report that matched, no relatives, no name. She called me Rena because she said I looked like I was already halfway to running somewhere, and it seemed a shame to slow me down. She raised me on a bookkeeper's salary and an enormous stubborn heart, and now she was 71, and her own memory was starting to go soft at the edges, which felt like the cruelest joke the universe could have written for the 2 of us. I called her on my break every night at 1. Some nights she knew me, some nights she asked very politely who was calling. I answered the same way. Either way, it's Rena. I found your daughter for you. It's me. That night, she'd known me, and we talked about her window box, and I'd hung up smiling. So I was still half smiling when the elevator at the end of the corridor opened, and a man walked out who did not belong in my basement. You learn to read people fast at a lost and found counter. The tired ones. The furious ones. The ones lying about what was in the bag. This man was none of those. He wore a charcoal coat that cost more than I made in a season, and an earpiece coiled behind his jaw, and he moved with the flat, contained economy of someone who had been trained to hurt people and had decided tonight to be polite about it. He set both palms on my counter. His knuckles were scarred, his hands were shaking, very slightly, and he was trying hard to make them stop. I need to report a lost item, he said. Small, a locket, silver, on a broken chain. It would have come off a boarding lounge in the private wing sometime after 10. He described it with an odd, aching precision. The size of a thumbnail, an old hairline dent on the back, a clasp that didn't quite catch anymore. Has anything like that come in? I haven't processed tonight's collection yet, I said. If it was turned in, it'll be in the cart. You can leave a description and a number, and I'll wait. He said it too fast. Then, catching himself quieter, please, I'll wait as long as it takes. Sir, it may not even be here. Items from the private terminal don't always route to whatever it's worth, he said, and reached into his coat, and I tensed before I understood he was only going for a billfold. He laid a band of cash on the counter without counting it, the way you'd set down, something you'd stopped caring about. That's a finder's fee. There's more. I've had people offer me $20 for a lost phone charger, with more warmth than this man was offering a small fortune. That was what unsettled me. Not the cash. The fear underneath it. Whatever that little silver locket was, it wasn't jewelry to him. It was the only thing in the world he had left to lose. Whose is it? I asked. Something closed in his face. A shudder coming down my employer's, he said. That's all you need to know, and honestly, it's more than I'd tell you if I had a choice. I'm not trying to pry. I just log what people tell me, then log this. He leaned an inch closer, and for a second the politeness thinned and I saw what was underneath it, not anger, but a kind of dread I recognized from the mirror on my own bad nights. There are things a man can lose and keep walking. That's not one of them. If it turns up, you don't hand it to a courier, you don't mail it, you don't set it in a bin for mourning. You call that number and you wait. Am I clear? You're clear, I said. He left a card, no name printed on it, just 10 digits in flat black type, and told me a car would sit at the arrival's curb until dawn no matter how long it took, and then he stepped back into the elevator, and the doors slid shut and swallowed him, and the basement went quiet, again except for the tubes humming overhead. I stood there a moment with my heart doing something strange in my chest. Then I pulled tonight's collection cart out from under the counter to start logging it, the way I had 1,000 times before. And there, tangled in a claim envelope near the top, was a small silver locket on a broken chain. Procedure is very clear about high-value items. Anything unclaimed and valuable gets opened, documented, and photographed before it goes into the overnight vault, partly to catalog it, partly so that no one can ever accuse a night clerk of pocketing what was inside. Normally, I'd have logged it, sealed it, and called the number on the card, and that would have been the end of my part. In it, a trinket, a rich man's panic, a story to tell Nella tomorrow. Instead, I sat down under the light with the locket in my palm, and I opened it, because that was the rule, and rules were the one thing in my life that had never once let me down. It took some coaxing. The clasp really was worn out. The little dent on the back had bent the seam, but it gave, finally with a soft click that I felt more than heard, and the two halves fell open, like a tiny book, across my thumb. Inside were 2 photographs, both old, both hand-tinted, in the careful way people did before color film was ordinary. Cheeks brushed with a pink that had faded to the color of the inside of a shell. On the left was a woman, dark-haired, laughing at whoever held the camera, one hand lifted as if to wave the moment away. She had the kind of face that made you feel, even across decades and through cheap tint, that she had been warm to be near, that if you'd been a child in the room, you'd have gone and stood at her knee without being asked. Someone had polished the frame of her so many times with a thumb that the silver had gone bright there and dull everywhere else. Someone had loved her enough to carry her until the hinge gave out and still not been willing to stop. I looked at her and my throat did something, without my permission, because no one had ever carried a picture of me anywhere. Nella had exactly one, a school photo from the year I turned 8, the first year I existed on paper, and she kept it on the refrigerator, and it was the whole of my documented life. I hadn't known, until that exact second under those buzzing lights, how much I minded that the road behind me was blank. That somewhere, there might have been a woman who lifted her hand and laughed, and a camera, and me, and that all of it had been shut behind the door I wasn't allowed to open. Then I turned the locket a little to catch the light on the other side, and I looked at the second photograph, and the room went very far away. It was a little girl, 5, maybe 6. solemn where the woman was laughing, staring straight down the lens with a seriousness that didn't match her round child's face. Dark hair pushed back off her forehead. And there, just visible above her left ear, where the hair parted, a thin pale line, a scar. I stopped breathing. The hum of the fluorescent tube seemed to swell until it was the only sound in the world. I lifted my free hand, slowly, the way you move when you already know, and are trying to give the truth one last chance to be something else, and pressed my fingertips to my own hairline above my own left ear. The same place, the same length, the same faint hook at the end where it curved toward the temple, the same scar. I looked from the photograph to my reflection in the dark screen of the terminal beside me and back to the photograph, and there was no mistaking it, no talking myself out of it, no angle at which the child in the silver became a stranger. It was the same face, my face, unfinished, softened by years. I couldn't remember, looking straight down a lens held by someone who had loved her enough to carry her forever. I owned nothing from before I was 7. No photograph, no toy, no name that anyone had ever been able to trace. My whole childhood was a locked door, with no room behind it. So how, in the name of God, was I looking at a picture of myself, inside a necklace that belonged to a man I had never met in my life? For a long time I didn't move. The locket lay open across my palm, my whole vanished childhood staring up at me from a stranger's silver, and the only sound was the tubes buzzing and my own heart going too hard. Then I did the thing the rules told me to do. I picked up the card and dialed the 10 flat digits. It rang once. You found it, not a question. The handler's voice, low and taut. And under the control I heard the same thing I'd heard at the counter, a man barely holding the lid on. Don't touch anything else. Don't log it. Stay exactly where you are. I'm coming down. It's a locket, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. Silver. 2 photographs inside. A silence opened on the line, and in it I could hear an airport somewhere behind him, a boarding call, the far echo of a terminal that was awake in a way. Mine was not. Whose photographs? I asked. Who does this belong to? That's not your concern, ma'am. I need you to. There's a picture of a little girl inside it. My hand had started to shake. I need to know whose it is. I need to know where it came from, please. It matters more than you. It's my employer's. And you do not want his attention. Do you understand me? The politeness was gone now, stripped down to something raw and almost pleading. Whatever you do, do not come up here. Do not carry it to him yourself. People who walk up to that man, without warning, people who surprise him, it does not go the way you'd think. Stay in the basement. Let me come to you. Then tell me one thing, I said. The little girl, in the photograph. Do you know who she is? The pause on the line lasted a beat too long. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Careful now, the way you're careful around something that might go off. But he does. He's been looking for her for 20 years. And I'm telling you, as a kindness, ma'am, you do not want to be a stranger who walks up to him waving that necklace. Not tonight. Sit tight. 20 years. The words landed somewhere under my ribs and stayed there. I looked at the clock over the door. 2:11 a.m. On the little monitor beside my desk that mirrored the private wing's schedule, a single charter sat blinking against a gate in the executive terminal. Boarding, 038, 38 minute. Then that plane, and whoever it belonged to, and the only key that had ever fit the locked door of my life, gone into the dark, forever, before I even learned his name. I had spent 20 years standing outside a room I couldn't enter, my whole self reduced to a scar and a dream about smoke. Doctors had knocked on that door with hypnosis and medication and endless gentle questions, and it had never once opened. And now, a man I'd never met had been standing on the other side of it for exactly as long as I'd been standing on mine, looking for the same girl, the one in the silver, the one with my face. If he boarded that plane, the door closed for good, and I went back to being a woman with no yesterday, forever. Some things a person cannot let walk onto a jet. My hands were steady when I did it, which surprised me. I logged myself off the desk for the first time in 6 years. The little screen, blinking off-duty at me in accusation. And I did not call for the night supervisor, and I did not follow the protocol printed and laminated on the wall beside the vault. I closed the locket gently in my fist, so that the small, solemn face was pressed to my palm like something I was keeping warm, and I walked out from behind the counter that had been the whole safe shape of my life, and I went up into the dark to find the man it belonged to. I told myself I only wanted an answer. I know now, that isn't the whole truth. Some part of me, the part behind the locked door, already knew it was going home. An airport at 2 in the morning is a body between heartbeats. I took the service corridors first, the ones the public never sees, concrete and cable trays, and the deep mechanical hum of a building keeping itself alive while it sleeps. Then, up into the terminal proper, where the great glass ribs arched black against a black sky, and the departure boards hung dark, and the moving walkways sat frozen, their rubber handrails going nowhere. My footsteps came back at me off surfaces built to swallow the noise of thousands. There were no thousands. There was only me, and a locket sweating in my fist, and a fear I couldn't name growing colder with every gate I passed. I passed a coffee kiosk, with its grill down and its chairs stacked like something waiting to be buried. A cleaning cart sat abandoned mid-aisle, its mop handle canted against a pillar, and the emptiness of it, the sense of a place that a great many people had only just left or were about to arrive in, but never actually were, pressed on me the way churches do. I am not a superstitious woman. 6 years of urns and prosthetic legs and other people's grief will cure you of that. But somewhere past gate 40, I began to feel that I was not so much walking toward the private wing as being drawn to it, hand over hand, along a thread I couldn't see and hadn't tied. The executive wing was on the far end, past a frosted glass wall and a discreet desk where, at this hour, a single guard should have sat. The chair was empty. That should have stopped me. It didn't. I pushed through the glass door into a world I'd worked beneath for 6 years and never once been allowed to enter. Low, amber light, real wood, carpet that ate my steps whole, the hush of money that has stopped needing to announce itself. And that was when it started. It came the way the dream always came, sideways, without permission, the smell of smoke that wasn't there, a low ceiling pressing down where there was no low ceiling. A wooden slat an inch from my face, in a bright empty corridor that had no wood in it at all. My own breath held so tight it hurt. I realized I actually was holding it, standing in the middle of the carpet with my hand at my scar, and then more of it than I had ever been given, arriving all at once, like a drawer pulled too far and spilling, heat on the far side of the wood, the orange flicker of it through a crack. A small, warm weight pressed against my side in the dark, trembling, and my own child's arm around it, holding on. And under all of it, faint after 20 years of silence, a woman's voice, very close, very quiet, breathing a word into my ear, not English, a name maybe, or an instruction. Stay. Don't make a sound. Gone before I could catch its shape, leaving only the certainty that I had once kept absolutely still in the dark to keep something alive. I put my hand against the wall until the corridor was just a corridor again, and my breath came back, and the smoke faded out of a place that had never held any. Voices. Ahead, around the curve, where the light spilled warm from an open lounge. 2 men, low and unhurried, the voices of people who think the building is empty. Wheels up the second, the ink's dry. Old man Varga wants it signed on the tarmac, not a minute after. He doesn't trust Sokol to hold still that long, would you? 20 years of blood, and the boss just folds it into a marriage. Signs the whole house over with a handshake. A short, ugly laugh. After tonight, there's no Sokol name left to hold a grudge with. That's the entire point. You don't merge with the sockles. You bury them polite. Keep your voice down. He hears you talk like that, you'll be swimming home. I'm just saying what the old man's saying. Merrick's the one who walked it in, spent a year at the boss's elbow whispering peace. Peace. It's time to bury the old war. And the boss listens to Merrick, always has. God knows why after. Enough. I stood pressed to the cold glass with my heart slamming and understood almost none of it, and all of it at once. A signing. A marriage. A man named Sokol, handing his whole world to a family named Varga. Tonight. And a name. Marek. Spoken with a curl of something that wasn't quite trust. And under it all the way they said bury them polite, made the smoke dream press at the back of my eyes again. Every sane instinct I had told me to turn around, go back down, post the locket into the claim slot at dawn, and never think about the private wing again. Men with guns were around that curve. A deal soaked in 20 years of blood was around that curve. Whatever. Bury them polite meant it was not a thing a night clerk survived being close to. But I had run my fingers over that scar on 1,000 anxious nights, and never once known where it came from. I had woken from that smoke 100 nights, and never once known what I'd been hiding from, or who I'd been holding onto in the dark. I thought of Nella on the other end of my 1 o'clock call, asking politely who was speaking. My whole family, reduced to a woman who was slowly forgetting I existed, because there was no one else alive who had ever known me. I thought of the blank road behind me. I thought of a door held open 1 inch, about to close for good. I straightened my collar, the way I did for difficult claimants, and I walked around the curve, toward the light. The lounge was all glass on one side. The runway lights strung out beyond it, like a fallen constellation. A long table had been set near the window, and on it, a leather folder lay open to a document thick with signature tabs, a heavy pen resting in the fold. 2 men in dark suits stood by the table. A woman sat at the end of it, poised and expensive and bored. A diamond the size of a problem on her hand. I would learn her name later, Sabbath Varga. But just then, she was only a beautiful stranger checking a slim gold watch as though the night were running behind. And at the window, with his back to all of it, stood a man. Tall, very still, dressed for a wedding or a funeral. It was impossible to tell which, in a charcoal suit cut close and severe. He held a phone loosely at his side and stared out at the runway like a man memorizing something he was about to lose. Everyone else in that room was waiting on him. You could feel it, the way the whole space bent toward his stillness. I should have handed the locket to one of the suited men. I should have said, "Lost and found, sir?" This was recovered downstairs and gone. Instead, I walked past all of them, on legs that didn't feel like mine, straight toward the still figure at the glass. And I opened my hand, and I said, "Excuse me, I think this belongs to you." He turned. I have tried since to describe what happened to his face, and I've never gotten it right. He was young, younger than the weight he carried, made him seem not 30, with a hard, handsome, closed sort of face, built for giving orders. And in the half-second, it took his eyes to travel from the silver in my palm up to my face. All of that came apart. The color went out of him, not slowly. All at once, the way a room goes dark when the power's cut, so that for an instant he looked less like a man and more like a photograph of one. The phone slipped from his fingers and cracked against the carpet, and neither of us looked at it. He said a word. Not "thank you," not "who are you?" One word. Low and broken, pulled up out of somewhere 20 years deep, in the same language the woman's voice in my dream had used. Vesna. The name went through me like cold water. I didn't know it. I had never in my life heard it. And every hair on my body stood up, as though some part of me buried behind the locked door had turned its head at the sound. The way you'll surface out of deep sleep, at your own name, spoken across a room, before you're even awake enough to know it's yours. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I think, my name is Rena. I only came to return. Vesna. He said it again, and took a step toward me, and his hand came up like he meant to touch my face and didn't dare, hovering an inch from my cheek as though I might be smoke that would scatter if he closed the distance. His eyes were wet and furious and disbelieving all at once, searching my face feature by feature, my brow, my mouth, the scar, matching it against something he had clearly held in his mind so long it had worn as bright as the silver in my hand. You're dead. I buried you. I put you in the ground 20 years ago. I have carried you every single day since. I have burned half this city, looking for the men who, his gaze dropped to the open locket, to the little scarred girl in the silver, and back up to the same scar living now on a grown woman's face, and his voice simply failed him. That was when the room understood something had gone wrong. The two suited men moved. Metal cleared leather, with a sound I felt in my teeth, and suddenly there were guns, one leveled at me, one swinging toward the door, and Sabit Varga was on her feet, the boredom gone from her face, replaced by the quick, cold calculation of someone watching a very expensive deal begin to die. The hard-faced, older man by the far wall came forward fast, faster than a man his age should have moved, reaching for the locket, for my wrist, his eyes fixed on the silver, with an expression I didn't have a word for yet. I would find the word later. Behind me, the lounge doors banged open, and Tavin came through them at a dead run, out of breath, too late, his own weapon already up and sweeping the room. I was in the center of it, a lost and found clerk in a wrinkled uniform with a locket in her fist. And every dangerous person in that room was suddenly moving at once. And I understood with perfect clarity that I had walked into something that could get me killed in the next 4 seconds. Don't touch her. It wasn't loud. That was the terrifying part. He didn't shout it. He said it the way you'd state a law of physics. Flat, certain, not open to negotiation. And the whole room froze on it. Guns, hands, the older man's outstretched arm, Taven's advance, all of it stopping mid-motion, as if the air itself had turned to glass and no one dared be the one to break it. He still hadn't taken his eyes off my face. Cancel the plane, he said quietly. Cancel the signing. The Varga contract is dead. Send them home tonight, all of them, and if a single one of them is still on my tarmac in 20 minutes, that's their choice and their funeral. Somewhere behind me, Sabith Varga made a sharp, disbelieving sound. You cannot be serious. My father is in the air right now to sign this. 20 years of Americ. The older man's voice, low, urgent, the voice of someone who had earned the right to use that name and was spending it carefully. Emeric, think about what you're doing. Whoever this woman is, whatever she looks like, you are about to set fire to everything we built over a ghost and a piece of costume jewelry. Let me handle her. Step back, and let me. Her name is Vesna. He said it to the whole room without turning his head, and something in the flatness of it made the older man go still. She died in the house the night they burned it, hiding me in the wall so I'd live. And she is standing in front of me, breathing. At last he looked away from me, one slow, deliberate turn, straight at the older man. And when he spoke again, his voice had dropped somewhere very cold and very quiet. Everything stops, said the man at the window, until someone tells me why the girl I buried is standing in my terminal, holding my mother's necklace, and why the two of you look so frightened that she came back. Nobody moved until he told them to. Everyone out, Emmerich said, except her. When Sabith Varga started to protest, something about her father, about insult, about the length of a flight from another country, made for nothing, he turned his head a few degrees, and whatever she saw in his profile closed her mouth. She gathered her coat and her diamond and walked out on heels that struck the stone like small hammers, and her people went with her, and the two enforcers went, and only 3 of us were left in the long glass room, Emeric and Tavin by the door. And the silver-haired man who had tried to take the locket from my wrist, the one the voices behind the frosted doors had called Merrick. You too, Merrick, Emeric said. I've stood beside you since you were 7 years old. Merrick didn't move. His voice was gentle, reasonable, the voice of a man who had spent decades being the calmest person in every dangerous room. I'm not leaving you alone with a stranger who walked out of the dark, carrying that. Think, Emmerich, how would she have it unless someone gave it to her? Unless this is exactly the kind of thing our enemies do on the night before a man signs away a war, put a face in front of him that he can't say no to. Den stay where I can see you, Emmerich said, and be quiet. And Merrick went still against the far wall, and I felt, without understanding why, that a line had just been drawn on the floor of that room, with him on one side of it and us on the other. And Merrick turned back to me. Up close, he was younger than his stillness, and older than his years, both at once. Sit, he said. And it wasn't an order so much as a plea, and I sat, because my legs had stopped believing in me anyway. You don't know who I am, he said. No, you don't know who you are. It wasn't a question. He said it the way you'd name a wound. Do you? I opened my mouth to say, of course I do. My name is Rena. I work downstairs, and nothing came out, because the smoke was rising again at the back of my eyes, and the woman's voice, and the wooden slat, and the held breath, and I understood that he had reached straight past the 20 years I could account for, and put his hand on the locked door itself. Tell me, I whispered. Please, whatever it is, I have been trying to open that door my whole life, and no one has ever had the key. If you have it, please. So, he told me. He told me about a house, not this cold country, another one, far away and long ago, a big old house full of family, and a boy of 7, who was the only son of it. He told me his father ran things that men kill each other over, and that there had been peace for a while, the fragile kind. And then one autumn night, the peace ended, the way those things end, with cars in the drive after midnight, and men coming through the doors with the lights already cut. I don't remember most of it, he said. I've tried. What I remember is a hand. He looked at my hands where they lay in my lap. A girl's hand, about my size, pulling me down a back hallway, while everyone else was running toward the noise. There was a space behind the wall in the pantry, a dumbwaiter shaft. The house didn't use anymore, just big enough for 2 children if they folded up small. She pushed me in first. Then she climbed in after me, and the loose board scraped shut across the gap and left us in the dark, and she put her arm around me, and she put her mouth against my ear. The room tilted very slowly, like a ship. And, she said, Emmerich went on, and his voice cracked straight down the middle. Stay. Don't make a sound. Stay. I heard it in 2 places at once, from his mouth, in the language he'd said Vesna in, and from somewhere inside my own skull in a woman's voice, and then in a child's, layered, 20 years apart. My hand had gone to my scar. I didn't remember lifting it. They came through the pantry twice, he said. I could see boots through the crack in the board. The second time, one of them heard something, a breath, a shift, I've never known what, and he pried the board back, and there she was, right at the edge, between me and the gap. Between me and them. She'd moved herself in front of me in the dark without a sound. He stopped, and for a moment he couldn't go on. Something happened to her in that gap. I heard it more than I saw it, and I have spent 20 years trying not to hear it again. But she never made a sound, not one, and I've always believed that silence is the only reason he decided the space was empty and moved on. He touched the side of his own head, above the ear, without seeming to know he'd done it. The exact place. She was hurt keeping me hidden, and she stayed quiet through all of it. She was 6 years old. I was crying. I didn't know when I'd started, when it was over, and the house was burning. Our people came back in for whoever was left. They pulled me out of the wall. They pulled her out too, but she wouldn't wake, and she was hurt badly. And in the chaos of that night, with the roof coming down, someone carried her out one door and someone carried me out another. And then there were weeks, I don't remember, and I was told, his jaw worked. I was told the housekeeper's daughter died of her injuries. That they buried her. I was 7.5 out of my mind, and I believed it, because a grown man I trusted stood in front of me and told me so, and I have put white flowers on that grave every autumn for 20 years. The locket, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. He opened his hand. He'd been holding it the whole time. It was my mother's. My mother wanted a daughter and never got one, so she half-adopted the housekeeper's little girl, dressed her up, spoiled her, kept her picture next to her own so she could pretend, I think, just a little. When they brought me out of that house, this was in the ash, by the stairs where my mother fell. It's the only thing of hers I have, the only thing of any of them. He turned it in the light, so the two small faces showed. For 20 years I have carried the two people who died for me that night, my mother. His thumb touched the laughing woman, and the little girl who put herself between me and the dark. He looked up at me. Her name was Vesna, he said. And she had a scar here, from falling off a garden wall the summer before, and I would know her face in 10,000, and she is not in a grave in another country. She is sitting in front of me, 26 years old, holding my mother's necklace, and she does not remember my name. The smoke came all the way up, then, the whole drawer spilling out at once, the dumbwaiter dark, the small trembling weight of him against my side, my own arm around him, my own child voice, not the grown woman's this time but mine, 6 years old, whispering it back to a crying boy to keep him quiet and keep him alive. Stay, stay, I've got you. Don't make a sound. And a woman above us, my mother, Myrella. The name arrived whole and warm and unbearable, shoving the board across, blowing me one kiss in the dark before she turned to go and pull the killers the other way. I made a sound I'd never made before. Emmerich caught me before I understood I was falling out of the chair, and for the first time in 20 years, someone held on to me who had also been in that wall, and neither of us said anything at all for a while. And in that while, the door I had spent my whole life on the wrong side of simply came off its hinges, and everything behind it came through at once. Not all in order. Memory doesn't cue politely, but in bright, unbearable pieces. A kitchen that smelled of bread and cardamom, and a big woman with flour to the elbows, who was my mother Myrella, singing something low in a language I hadn't heard in 20 years and understood every word of. A garden with a low stone wall I was forbidden to climb and climbed anyway, and the summer afternoon I went off the top of it and split my head and screamed more from fright than from pain, and a boy. This boy, younger, gap-toothed, terrified, for me, running for help across the grass, with his shoes in his hands. Being carried on Ilinka Sokol's hip like I belonged there, being called my second one, my little bird. Having a photograph taken in a stiff dress I hated. Being told to hold still and stop scowling, anyway. A whole first person buried alive under a scar and a bad dream. And I had been walking around on top of her grave for 20 years, calling myself Rena. I remember the wall, I said into his shoulder. My voice was wrecked. Not the airport wall, the pantry, I remember. Your hand was cold. I remember I told you a story about a fox, so you'd stop shaking, and you wet yourself and cried about it, and I said it didn't matter, and it didn't. I was laughing and crying at once, ugly, helpless. I remember my mother's face in the gap before she pushed the board across. She blew me a kiss. She was so calm. She knew she wasn't coming back. And she blew me a kiss, so the last thing I saw wouldn't be her afraid. Vesna, he said again, and this time the name landed in a room that had a floor under it because I finally knew it was mine. I've been Rena for 20 years, I said. Somebody named me after they pulled me out of a fire, with no memory, and no papers, and no mother. I built a whole quiet life, so nobody would ever ask me a question I couldn't answer. I pulled back far enough to look at him. You're the answer, you're the whole answer. And a man told you I was dead. It was Marek who broke it. This is extraordinary, he said from the wall, warm and smooth, and I felt Emmerich go rigid around me. Truly. But I'd urge caution, Emmerich. A woman appears the same night. You're to make peace. wearing the one face that could unmake you, convenient beyond belief. The Varga family would give a great deal to see this alliance collapse, and you back at war and grief makes a man easy to steer. I only want you to ask who benefits before you burn it all down. You want to know who benefits, Emmerich said slowly, not letting go of me. From 20 years of me believing she was dead, and something in the room changed temperature because someone had finally said it out loud. That the grown man who'd stood in front of a 7-year-old and told him the girl had died had never once been named, and that he was still, all these years later, standing very close and telling Emmerich what to believe. Sir, Tavin's voice, tight, from the door. He was looking at his phone. The Varga jet just turned back mid-air, and Marek's driver pulled off the tarmac 4 minutes ago before you cancelled anything. He looked up. Before anyone told him to. For a moment nobody in that room breathed. Marek smiled. The patient smile of a man who has never once in his life been caught flat and spread his empty hands. My driver gets cold. He idles at the far gate. Tavin, you're frightening the poor woman with theater. He pushed off the wall unhurried. Emmerich, you're exhausted and you've had a shock that would break a stronger man. Let me take the necklace. Put it somewhere safe. Put a guard on Miss. The faint pause, the faint contempt, Rena. And we'll sort out what's real in the morning when the Varga plane is on the ground, and we haven't handed our enemies a war for free. Take one more step toward her, Emmerich said, and it will be the last decision you make standing up. He said it so quietly. That was the thing about him. I was only beginning to learn that the softer he went, the closer the danger. Marek heard it too. He stopped and the smile stayed on his mouth, but left the rest of his face. Emmerich straightened. He kept one hand at my back, steadying, but the man who spoke now was not the one who had wept over a dumbwaiter shaft. This was the one the whole terminal bent toward. Tavin, get on the tower. The Varga aircraft does not land at Corvain. Not tonight, not this week. Divert it. And if the old man doesn't like it, he can circle until his fuel runs to prayers. The contract is dead. There is no peace. There is no marriage. There is no signing. Anyone who put money or blood into that arrangement can consider it a loss. He drew a breath. And put every man we have on the roads out of the executive wing. Nobody leaves the airport in the next hour. Nobody. That's a war, Marek said. You understand that. Dragon Varga flew across an ocean to bury a 20-year grudge because I spent 3 years convincing him you were worth burying it with. You throw that back in his face tonight over a ghost, and by this time tomorrow, there will be men outside your mother's memorial and your own front door. Is she worth that? A lost and found girl who can't even remember your name? She remembered it in the wall, Emmerich said. She remembered a fox and a kiss and the color of my mother's flower. She remembered more of that night in 10 minutes than I've clawed back in 20 years. So be careful, Marek. How many times you tell me she can't remember? It's starting to sound less like an observation and more like a hope. I felt Emerich's hand press flatter against my back. Not to hold me up now, but to keep me behind him. You keep calling her a ghost, he said. You keep telling me to be careful of her. You've spent 10 minutes trying to get that necklace out of this room and her out of my sight. 20 years ago, a man I trusted told me she was dead and I never questioned it, because why would a boy question the person holding him up at the funeral? He tilted his head. I never asked who told them where the dumbwaiter was, Marek. The house was ours for 100 years. Strangers don't find the one hollow wall on the first night. But you'd know it. You grew up in that house too. You played in that shaft with my father when you were boys. You'd know a child could hide there. And you'd know to tell the men to check the pantry twice. The silence stretched so long, I could hear the rain starting again on the great glass wall. You've lost your mind to a pretty coincidence, Marek said, but his voice had changed. Thinner now, a wire pulled tight, and he was already moving his weight back toward the door. 20 years of loyalty. 20 years of cleaning up after your father, and then after you, and you'll set it on fire, Because a woman has a scar, and you want her to be someone. I won't stand here and be accused by a boy playing at ghosts. When you come to your senses, you'll know where to find me. Tavin, Emeric said. Don't let him leave. But Merrick was quick for an old man. I'd noticed that the first moment, how fast he'd come across the room for the locket, and he had clearly measured the exits before any of the rest of us thought we'd need them. And by the time Tavin moved, Merrick was through the service door behind the bar, with it locked at his back. And the corridor beyond swallowed his footsteps, and he was gone. Emeric didn't chase him. He won't run far, he said almost to himself. He can't. If he runs, he's admitting it, and everything he's held together for 20 years depends on no one ever asking the question I just asked. No, he'll go to ground, and he'll make calls, and he'll try to make this go away before morning. His eyes came back to me, and the calculation in them frightened me less than what was underneath it. Which means the safest thing in this building tonight is also the most dangerous thing to be near. And that's you. Then he went still for a second, with his eyes shut, and when he opened them and turned to me, the strangest thing happened to his face. All the cold command drained back out of it and left something I had no defenses against at all, a boy's disbelief, the look of someone who has spent his whole life at a graveside and just watched the grave turn out to be empty in the best possible way. You came back, he said, not to the room. To me, like it was the only fact left standing. I only came to return a necklace, I said, and it came out as half a laugh and half a sob, because it was true, and it was the smallest, most absurdly ordinary reason for any of this. I know. His mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile, that hadn't been used in a long time, and had forgotten the shape. You always did give things back. You gave me my whole life back, and then you went and forgot you'd done it. Behind him the runway lights burned in the rain, and the Varga jet was somewhere over the black water turning in a slow, furious circle, and a man who had helped murder 2 families 20 years ago was loose in the tunnels under my airport. But Emeric Sokol was looking at me like the sun coming up, and against every instinct, 6 years of a safe, small, invisible life had drilled into me. I did not look away. They took me out of the airport in the middle of a moving box of men. I had spent 6 years being the person nobody looked at, and now 4 of them walked me down the service tunnel with their eyes everywhere. But on me, and Tavin drove, and Emeric sat beside me in the back of a car with blacked windows and did not once let go of the necklace or of me. We went out along the coast road in the last of the dark, and the city fell away, and the car turned in at a gate I didn't see until we were through it, up a long drive to a house on a headland with the sea working gray and endless below. It was my grandmother's, Emeric said. The first thing he'd said in 20 minutes. Nobody knows I keep it. If Merrick doesn't know a place exists, he can't sell it. He looked at me. You'll be safe here. I need you to be one thing tonight, and it's safe. Can you do that? I've been safe for 20 years, I said. It turns out safe is just another word for the door staying shut. I don't think I want it anymore. He didn't answer that. But something in his face moved. The doctor came at first light, a small, brisk woman named Selene, who had clearly been woken and clearly knew better than to ask why. She took my blood pressure and my pulse, and shone a light in my eyes, and then Emeric said something to her low, and she went still, and looked at me differently, and asked if she could feel along my scalp. Her fingers found the ridge above my left ear and stopped. There's an old fracture here, she said quietly. Healed long ago, decades. The kind of blunt injury that, in a child, would very often take the memory around it and never give it back. She lowered her hands. Whoever you're deciding she is, she said to Emeric, the head agrees with you. This happened when she was small, and it happened all at once, and it was violent. I put my own fingers where hers had been. I had touched that ridge more times than I could count, and called it a scar from a fall, and it was a garden wall. A summer before the world ended, the pale line the locket had caught. But the fall never took my memory. Something else had struck the same place, hard enough to crack the bone beneath the old scar, and that was the print of the thing that erased me. It was proof, in my own skull, that Amaric's 20-year grief and my 20-year silence were the same wound seen from two sides. "There's one more thing," Emmerich said, when the doctor had gone. He was turning his phone in his hand. "You have someone, a woman, Nella. You called her at 1 in the morning, every night. My people pulled your phone records the first hour I knew you were real, before I knew who you were, because that's the sort of thing I do and I won't pretend otherwise." He said it like a confession. "She's in a care home in the city. Her memory's going." My stomach dropped. "You put a guard on her 4 hours ago." "She's the only family you have. And I lost my whole family in a night. So believe me when I say, I understand exactly what she is." He hesitated. "And I've paid the home through the end of her life and moved her to the good wing. The one with the garden. She kept telling my man about a window box. So I thought." He stopped, awkward all at once, this terrifying man, over a window box. "I thought she should have somewhere to plant things. I had spent my whole adult life, carefully, quietly funding one old woman's dignity out of a night clerk's wages, telling myself it was enough, knowing it wasn't. And a man I'd met 4 hours ago had reached out and simply closed the gap, the way you'd close a locket, because I mattered to him, and therefore she did. I didn't have words for it. I crossed the room, and I put my arms around him instead. And after a second, his came around me, careful, like he still half expected me to be smoke. "You don't have to fix everything by dawn," I said into his coat. "I lost you once, by not fixing something by dawn," he said. "Forgive me if I overcorrect." He made me eat, after that, stood over me in his grandmother's kitchen while I picked at bread and cheese I didn't taste, because it turned out being erased and unerased in the same night burns through a body like a fever. And when I'd eaten, he sat across the scarred old table from me in the gray sea light, and for once since the terminal, nobody was pointing anything at anyone, and the quiet was almost harder than the guns. "What was I like?" I asked. "Before. You said you remember enough for 2. Something eased in his face. "Bossy," he said, completely without fear, "which drove your mother to distraction. You climbed everything. You gave the dogs opinions. You decided I was yours the day I arrived. I was a shy, spoiled little heir, and you were the housekeeper's daughter, and by every rule of that house, we weren't supposed to be anything to each other. And you looked at me across the courtyard and decided the rules were stupid, and that was that." He turned his glass slowly on the wood. "And you gave things back, always. If a maid dropped a coin, you ran it down. If I took the last of something you made me, split it. It was maddening. It was the best thing about you." Later, when I was older and everything I touched was about taking, I used to think the one honest person I'd ever known gave everything back. And she was 6, and she was gone. I found I couldn't look at him. I looked at my hands instead. I spent 20 years making sure I never wanted anything. I couldn't survive losing. I said, "That's what the quiet was. That's what the basement was. You can't be disappointed if you never hope. You can't lose a family if you never let yourself have one, just Nella." And I told myself Nella was enough. Because Nella was safe, because a woman losing her memory can't ever leave you the cruel way on purpose. My voice had gone thin. "And now you're sitting there telling me I had a mother who called me her little bird, and a boy who thought I was the best thing in the house, and a whole self I don't remember agreeing to lose, and I wanted Emmerich. I want all of it so badly I can't breathe, and wanting it is the most frightening thing that has ever happened to me. More than the men with the guns. Because the guns can only kill me. This can disappoint me." He reached across the table, slowly, the way you'd move near something that might bolt, and turned my hand over, and laid his palm against it, and didn't grip, just rested there, warm, letting me be the one to decide. "I'm not a safe thing to want," he said. "I won't lie to you about that either. You've seen what I am. There are men in the ground because of me, and there will be more before the week is out. But I have wanted exactly one thing every single day for 20 years, and it was you alive, and now you are. And I am not capable of disappointing you out of that. Vesna, it's the only promise I've got. Everything else about me, you should be careful of. Not that. Please don't be lying, I whispered. It came out of the 6-year-old, I think. It came out of the wall. I'm not, he said. We might have stayed like that a while, but Tavin came in fast, tablet in hand, and the look on his face turned the morning back to iron. I found him in the house, Tavin said. In the old house. The records from the fire, the family's own account of that night, sealed for 20 years. There's a staff list. There's a diagram of the ground floor the investigators made. He turned the tablet so we could see. The pantry walls marked. And the only living person who gave a statement about where the children were hiding, the only one who told our people to stop looking in that wing because it was already cleared, was the young lieutenant who carried the boy out the front. Marek. He's the reason they stopped searching the pantry, Emmerich. He's the reason nobody came back for her in time. He wasn't the man who saved you. He was the man who made sure only one of you came out. The room went very quiet. Outside, the sea kept working at the rocks. He sold the house that night, Emmerich said. Not a question. To the Vargas. He was theirs. He's been theirs for 20 years, right at my elbow. And the peace he built me wasn't peace. It was a lid. Marry the family that paid him, close the books, make sure the one witness stays buried. His eyes came to me and I watched him understand the last of it. And then she walks into a terminal holding the one thing that could open the books again. Of course, he panicked. She's not just my miracle. She's his death sentence. That was when the windows went white. I didn't understand it at first. A flat, brilliant flash out on the dark headland. And then the crack of it reaching us a half-second late and glass coming in. Tavan was shouting, men were moving, and Emmerich had me on the floor behind the heavy stone kitchen island before I'd finished flinching, his body, a wall between me and the room. More cracks. I know now they were shots, and the awful close sound of them hitting the other side of the stone. 2 on a terrace, Tavin was barking, 1 on the drive, and through the ringing I saw it, a shape rising at the shattered window above Emmerich's turned back, a man bringing something up to his shoulder, and Emmerich facing the wrong way, facing me, shielding me, blind to it. I did not decide to move. 20 years fell away, and the girl who had put herself between a boy and the dark simply took the wheel. I grabbed the cast iron pan, hanging off the island, and I came up over Emmerich's shoulder and I hit the shape in the window as hard as anything I had ever done in my life, and the gun went off into the ceiling, and Tavin's answering shot took the man backward off the sill, and then Emmerich had me down again and it was his voice in my ear this time. Ragged. Furious, terrified. What are you doing? Stay down. Stay down. You were facing the wrong way, I said, shaking so hard my teeth hurt. Then it was over, as fast as it had come. The surviving attacker gone into the dark down the headland, the house full of the smell of cordite and sea air, glass everywhere like dropped stars. Emmerich knelt over me in it and took my face in both his hands and looked at me like he was counting me to make sure all of me was there. You put yourself between me and it, he said again. 20 years, and the very first chance you get, you do it again. I don't know how not to, I whispered. Something broke in him then. The last wall. He pressed his forehead to mine and shut his eyes. Don't, he said. Please. I have buried you once. I put white flowers on you every autumn for 20 years. I cannot do it twice, Vesna. I am not. I am not built to survive it twice. Don't make me lose you again. Whatever else you do, not that. I had never in my life been asked to stay by someone who would break if I didn't. I lifted my hand, the one that wasn't still gripping a dented pan, and pressed it flat to the side of his face. I stayed in that wall, I said, with my mother dead on the other side of it, because you were shaking, and someone had to keep you alive. I'm not going anywhere now. Do you understand me? I already decided this once, when I was 6. His phone rang against the ruined floor. He didn't want to answer it. I watched him not want to. He answered it because men like him always do. I watched the blood go out of his face the same way it had when he first saw mine across that lounge. "They're at the care home," he said. "Marek's men. The guard's down." He was already pulling me up, already moving. "He's taken Nella." He didn't take her far. He didn't need to. He only needed her somewhere I would come. The place was an old airfield out past the marshes. Vell Field, decommissioned before I was born. A single sagging hangar and a windsock rotted to a rag, and a runway going back to grass. Marek owned it through 3 shell companies Tevin found in the 40 minutes it took us to get there through the gray morning. Of course he did. A man who has spent 20 years planning to disappear keeps a door of his own. The 40 minutes were the longest of my life. The marsh went by gray and flat and endless outside the blacked glass, tidal channels catching the low sky like knife cuts, and Emeric sat beside me loading and checking things I made myself not look at, and Tevin drove too fast, and none of us said very much. I kept my hand around the cold iron pan I'd carried out of the house, without deciding to. A woman going to a gunfight with a piece of kitchenware. But it had already saved him once, and I'd learned the only lesson that mattered. The useful thing, in a room where everyone is stronger than you, is not to be strong, it's to pay attention, and to move first. "When this is done," Emeric said once, looking out at the marsh, "I'm going to take you somewhere with no history at all. A white room, a blank one. And you're going to sleep for about a week." "Is that a real place you have?" I said. "Or a thing men in your line say to keep from thinking about the next 20 minutes? His mouth twitched. "The second one, but I'll build the first one." "It's going to be my favorite one," I said, and he looked at me then. And for a second, the marsh and the hangar and the 40 minutes fell away. "You do not get out of the car," Emeric told me. "You understand? He wants you. That's the whole point of taking her. The second he has both of you in the same room, he has everything, and I have nothing to bargain with. You stay in the car with Tavin. He has a 71-year-old woman whose memory is going," I said. "Who doesn't know why she's frightened? Who is going to ask the frightening man standing over her if he's seen her daughter? Because on her bad days, she forgets I'm grown." My voice didn't shake. "That surprised me. I am not staying in the car." He looked at me for a long moment in the gray light, and I saw him lose the argument, and I saw it cost him. Then behind me, he said, "The whole time, and when I tell you to run, this once in your life, Vesna, you run." The hangar was cold and vast and smelled of old oil and pigeon and rain coming through the roof in 100 places. Nella sat on a folding chair in the middle of all that emptiness, small and confused, a blanket around her shoulders that some man with a gun, and apparently a scrap of shame, had put there. When she saw me, her whole face opened like a window. "There you are," she said, as though I were late for tea. "I've been telling this man about my window box, and he won't say a word." Marek stood behind her chair. He looked older in the gray light, and tired, and utterly unsurprised to see me alive and walking, which was its own kind of confession. "You shouldn't have brought her," he said to Emeric, nodding at me, while his men fanned along the walls. "Now, I have to decide about her, and I never wanted to decide about her. I want you to know that. 20 years ago, I didn't want to decide about her either. She was a child. I told them the wing was clear. I told myself she'd get out." "You told me she was dead," Emeric said. "Because by the time they carried her out, it was easier. If she was, it came out of him raw, and I understood. I was watching the wire finally snap. You were the heir. You had to be kept and moved and hidden and raised, and a little servant girl who'd seen the men's faces was a loose thread that could hang all of us. Me, the Vargas, the whole arrangement that kept you breathing. So, yes. I let them carry her off to a state hospital with no name and no memory, and I stood at an empty grave, and I told a grief-blind boy she was in it. And it worked, Emmerich. For 20 years it worked. You lived. I made peace. I turned a massacre into a marriage. I did the ugly arithmetic nobody else had the stomach for, and every single one of you is alive, because I was willing to. You want a medal, I said. I hadn't planned to speak. The words came from somewhere very old and very steady, and the whole cold hangar turned toward the sound of them. Mine, the loose threads, the one voice. In the room I'd been told for 20 years no longer existed. You carried a child out of a burning house and dropped her in the dark to save yourself, and you've spent 2 decades calling it a kindness. I took a step out from behind Emmerich's shoulder, and he made a low sound of warning, and I ignored it, because for once in my life, I understood exactly who I was, and exactly what I was owed. I was in that wall, Merrick. I remember the fox story. I remember my mother's face in the gap. And here is the part your careful books never accounted for. I remember coming to, in a corridor full of smoke, and crawling the wrong way away from the doors, because there was a man in a good coat telling everyone the wing was clear, and I was 6, and I thought if a grown-up said it was clear, then it must be safe to go quiet. You didn't lose me by accident. You told me it was safe to disappear. And then you spent 20 years making sure I stayed disappeared. My voice didn't shake at all now. I'm not a loose thread, I'm the witness. And I came back on my own 2 feet to tie you off with. Merrick looked at me for a long moment, and something moved behind his tired eyes that might, in a better man, have become shame. Say her name, Emmerich said quietly. What? You keep saying the servant girl. A loose thread. Emmerich had gone very still, and I had learned by now what that stillness meant. She has a name. My mother gave her a photograph, and a place at our table and a name. Say it. Merrick's hand tightened on the pistol at Nella's shoulder. Don't. Her name is Vesna, Emmerich said. And she pulled me into a wall and told me a story about a fox while your friends murdered my mother 20 feet away. And she took a blow to the head that erased her whole life so that I could keep mine. That's the loose thread. That's the arithmetic. Say her name, Merrick, or, so help me. It happened fast, the way I'm told these things do. Merrick swung the gun off Nella and toward me the loose thread, the death sentence. The one he'd always have to decide about. And Merrick moved. And I moved. And I did the only useful thing a lost and found clerk knows how to do, which is that I had spent the whole drive with my hand around the dented iron pan I never put down. Hard and flat and true. And it took Merrick across the wrist, as the shot went wide and screamed off the metal roof. And then Tavin was there, and Emmerich was there, and it was very loud, for a few seconds, and then very quiet. And when the quiet came, Merrick was on the concrete floor of his own last door, with Emmerich standing over him, and the pistol was kicked away into the dark, and it was finished. Emmerich didn't gloat. He crouched down beside the man who had stolen 20 years from both of us, and he said something too low for me to hear, and Marek said one word back, and it might have been her name and it might have been sorry. And then Emmerich did what men in his world do to men who murder their families and call it arithmetic. And I turned Nella's chair gently away so she wouldn't see, and I held her confused old face against my shoulder and told her about window boxes until it was over. Is your young man cross with someone? She asked me. He was, I said. For a very long time. I think he's done now. We went out of that cold hangar into a gray morning that had somehow turned into ordinary daylight while we weren't looking. The marshbirds calling, the rotted windsocks stirring, the world carrying on the way it does, indifferent and merciful, at once. Seven walked Nella slowly toward the car with the blanket still around her shoulders, murmuring to her, and she was telling him now about a variety of geranium that did well in shade, and he was saying, "Is that right, ma'am?" Like a man who had decided that today, of all days, Emmerich came out of the hangar last. He stood in the wet grass a moment with his eyes shut, his face turned up into the thin light, and I understood that whatever he'd been carrying since he was 7 years old, The empty grave, the white flowers, the wrong story a trusted man had told a grieving boy. He had just. And that setting a thing down after 20 years does not feel like relief. It feels like the strange, weightless terror of arms that don't know what to do now that they're empty. I went and stood in front of him. I didn't say anything clever. I'd run out of clever somewhere back in that hangar. It's over, I said. You can stop now. You found the men. You found me. It's actually over. I don't know how to stop, he said, without opening his eyes. I've been at war since I was 7. I don't know what a man like me even is. Once he stops, then we'll find out, I said, slowly. There's no hurry anymore. That's the gift of the ending. Nobody's coming. We have all the time there ever was. I took his hand, the one that had done the terrible necessary thing a minute ago, and I held it in both of mine, unafraid of it, because I had finally remembered that these were the same hands that had been a cold, shaking child's hands in a wall, and I had held those too. Come on, let's take my mother home, Dragon Varga called at noon. I was there for it. Emeric had stopped sending me out of rooms. He put the old man on speaker in the kitchen of the house on Halden Point, with the sea in the window and the glazier already measuring the shot-out frames, and he let me hear a patriarch who had flown across an ocean to bury a war, discover that the war was, instead, coming home. Your man is dead, Dragon Varga said. Not a question. My mother's murderer is dead, Emeric said. He worked for you for 20 years. He arranged a marriage to launder what your family did in that house 20 years ago. I want you to understand that I know all of it now, in writing, in his own hand. He was a careful man, he kept books, and that the only reason your family still exists at the end of this call is that I am tired of the sound of houses burning. His voice never rose. There is no alliance. There is no marriage. Move a single crate through my city, send a single man across my line, and I will publish what he wrote, and let your own people do to you what you sent him to do to mine. Fly home, Mr. Varga. Bury your grudge yourself, in the ground where mine has been for 20 years. Don't call again. He set the phone down. Outside a gull went over crying. It was, I understood, the sound of a 20-year war simply stopping, not with an explosion, but with a man deciding he would rather have one living person than 100 dead enemies. The days after were strange and slow and full of paper. Emeric's people were very good at finding things. It turned out, once they were finally looking for the right girl instead of the wrong ghost, within a week they had the rest of me. My mother's whole name, Myrella Dragomir, 34 years old the night she died, widowed young, housekeeper to the Sokol family for 11 years, beloved, by every account anyone could still find, by everyone who met her. A single surviving photograph, recovered from an old parish register in the town where I was born, my mother at 20, before any of it, laughing at the camera in a way I recognized instantly, because it was the same laugh the locket had caught, because it was, I realized with a jolt that took my breath, my laugh. The one Nella used to say came out of me like it surprised me, my actual birthday, which was not the arbitrary date a social worker had assigned a nameless child. The name I'd been christened with before the fire took the church that held the record, and the blow took the girl who answered to it. I sat, with all of it spread across the same scarred kitchen table for a long time. 26 years, and I could finally hold my own beginning in my 2 hands. It didn't fill the gaps. Solene was right. Some of the first 7 years were gone into the dark for good. That particular door only ever came off its hinges partway, but it was a floor. For the first time in my life, there was something solid underneath me that had been there before I was old enough to build it myself. And here's the thing I want to be honest about, because it's the part that surprised me most. I could have left. Emeric told me so, plainly, the way he told me everything now. He said I had a name and papers and money he'd already put aside, and that if I wanted a white room and a blank life, far from men who solve things with a shovel, he would grieve it privately and let me go without a word, because he had learned, 20 years too late, that loving someone is not the same as keeping them where you can see them. He said I never owed him the wall. He said I never owed him a single thing. I thought about it for exactly as long as it took to picture it, a quiet, clean life, somewhere, safe, unremarkable. Nobody asking a question I couldn't answer. The old dream. And I didn't want it anymore. I hadn't wanted it since the moment that door swung open in the terminal. A safe, small life is a wonderful thing to build when you have nothing. It is a coffin when you finally have something to lose, so I stayed. I chose it in daylight, clear-eyed, knowing exactly what he was and exactly what it would cost, which is the only kind of choosing that ever counts for anything. Later, when the house was quiet and Nella was asleep in the good wing across the city, with a guard who'd been told to bring her anything she asked for, Emmerich took me out along the headland to a low stone wall above the sea. There was a bench there, and a stone let into the grass, and on the stone a name that was not quite mine. The name they'd put on the empty grave in another country, carved here too so he'd have somewhere near to bring the flowers. White ones. There was a fresh bunch of them going brown in a jar. 20 autumns, he said. I never missed one. I used to talk to you. I'll deny it if you tell anyone. I knelt down in the grass, and I looked at the stone with my dead name on it, the name of the girl who'd been buried, so a lie could live, and I felt her let go of me at last. Not painfully, the way the door had come off its hinges, but softly the way you set something down when your arms are finally tired enough to admit it. You can stop bringing flowers here, I said. She's not in the ground. She's kneeling in your grandmother's grass, with wet knees. Telling you the fox story was the only one she knew. He drew the locket out of his pocket then and pressed it into my hand and closed my fingers over it. This was always going to be yours, he said. My mother kept your face next to hers because she couldn't choose between her children. Neither can I. Take it, give me back the empty grave. It's a fair trade. You always were fair, even at 6, even about the fox. I opened it one more time in the sea light. The laughing woman who'd carried me on her hip and called me her little bird, and the solemn scarred child who'd survived long enough to become a woman who returned lost things. And I finally understood the whole shape of the thing I'd walked into. A man froze in an airport because a stranger held out a necklace with a dead girl's face inside it. But the dead girl's face was mine, and it was alive, and it had come back on its own 2 feet to give him the last piece of everyone he'd lost. He hadn't frozen because I was a ghost. He'd frozen because for one impossible second, the whole ledger of his grief had balanced. I still don't remember all of it, I said. There are gaps. There'll always be gaps. Solene says, I might never get the whole first 7 years back. Then we'll build the rest, Emmerich said. I remember enough for 2. I've done nothing but remember for 20 years. Let me spend the next 20 putting it back into you one piece at a time. The fox, the garden wall, my mother's flower, your mother's voice. He knelt down in the wet grass beside me, this dangerous, gentle man. And he was not the boss the world bent toward now. He was just the boy from the pantry who'd finally stopped shaking. Stay, he said. Don't disappear again. Stay. And there it was. The word from the wall. The word my mother breathed into my ear. The word I whispered back to him 20 years ago in the dark to keep him alive. It came all the way home. I saw the pantry and the crack of orange light and his cold small hand in mine, and I knew him. Not from a photograph, not from a story he'd told me, but from the inside, from the memory that had finally opened its own door. I know you, I said, and started to cry, and it was the good kind at last. Emmerich, I know you. It's you, the boy in the wall. I found you. After all this time, I actually found you. No, he said, gathering me in against the sea and the wind and the white flowers and the whole long closed door of both our lives, swinging open at once. You found me 20 years ago, little bird. This time you just came back to collect. I had gone up to that private wing to return one lost thing. I came back down having found every single one of mine. She went up to that terminal to hand a stranger his necklace back and walked out with her name, her mother, her whole stolen childhood, and the one person left alive who'd been in the dark with her. Sometimes the thing you return turns out to be the thing that returns you. If Vesna's story got its hooks into you, the wall, the fox, the 20 autumns of white flowers, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and tell me down in the comments, what was the exact moment you realized whose face was in that locket? I read every one. I'll see you in the next story.